All right, my friends, we have been talking about weather in science, and we've talked about the different tools that we can use to measure the weather. We've talked about the different seasons, the different kinds of weather we can see in each of those seasons, and how it's a pattern, how it follows the same routine year after year. That's how we get our spring, summer, fall, and winter. Today, what we're going to do is we're going to talk about different kinds of severe weather that we can have. Those are those storms that we can see. We have different kinds of storms throughout the year. So today what we're going to do is we're just going to talk about the different kinds of severe storms that we can see in our weather. And then we're going to read a funny story about a crazy kind of storm that happens in a town called Chew and Swallow. Okay? All right, so severe weather is weather that is very stormy. A thunderstorm has lots of rain, and it can have thunder and lightning. And they can happen in places that have warm weather. So during the summer, when it can be really warm outside, and then all of a sudden, like around 5 o'clock, it gets really, really dark, it's because of that warm weather and some changes happening up in the air that cause a thunderstorm. And sometimes they can be pretty severe. We can have that thunder, and we can have that lightning and really hard rains and things like that. And sometimes people can lose their electricity. So severe thunderstorms are very, very stormy, and they can have lots and lots of rain and lightning and thunder. And we've seen those. And like I said, they usually happen. We get really big thunderstorms during the summer when the air is really warm. Okay, so that's one type. Thunderstorms are one type of storms that we can get. Another kind of storm we can get, and we really didn't have any this past winter, is a winter storm. And that's another kind of severe weather that we can have. And the weather during a winter storm is very cold. It can be icy, and it can be very snowy. We've seen storms like that, but we haven't had a big one like that in a long time. But that's definitely. And winter storms, do we get a winter storm during the summer? We don't. Winter storms happen in places where it's cold. That's why it happens during our winter season. That air has to be really cold in order to make that snow. Another type of big storm that we can get, and we haven't really had one of these, is a tornado. Sometimes you can have little ones, or sometimes they can happen, but we don't usually see a lot of tornadoes in our area. A tornado has very strong winds that can twist around and around. They can be called a twister. And many times thunderstorms can happen, or many times tornadoes can happen during thunderstorms, because it's something that happens up in the air, between the air and the ground, and then it creates that spinny winds that can touch down to the ground. So a lot of times if a place is having a lot of severe thunderstorms, they will start to call for a tornado watch too, because there's enough things happening up in the air swirling around that it can create a place for a tornado to happen. And what happens with a tornado is, so we said thunderstorms can happen in places that have really warm air. Well, what happens is with a tornado, you have cold air and warm air. And when you have cold air and warm air mixing together, it can create that really, those big, strong, twisty winds and things like that. Another type of severe storm that you can see is a hurricane. They happen close to the ocean, and they make strong winds and rain, and they can make very large waves, and you can see the trees bending. So hurricanes happen more closer to the ocean, and they have strong winds, and they can have a lot of wind. They can have a lot of wind and rain, and they can make really big waves. Okay. One more kind of storm that I just want to mention is called a dust storm. So a dust storm happens in deserts, those dry places. We hear the word dust, so we're thinking, sand and things like that. And strong winds can happen, and it blows the sand and the soil. If it's in a dry place, or if it's in the desert, it draws the sand. So the types of storms that we typically see we typically see those thunderstorms during the summer, those really big ones. We can have them throughout the year, but we see them more so in the summertime because of that warm weather. And we can see those winter storms because we live in an area that gets cold during the winter. Sometimes we might see a tornado or hear about a tornado because they happen during really big thunderstorms. Hurricanes are closer to the beaches, so they can cause those big winds and big waves and things like that. And then you have your tornadoes that can happen, and they are because of that mix of the cold and that warm air together, and they can cause those big spinny winds that kind of twist around like that. And like I said, another name for a tornado is called a twister. And then dust storms, typically in big flat areas or in deserts. And we don't have a lot of those. So dust storms are not one that we typically see where we live. But thunderstorms and winter storms are the two out of all of those that are ones that we would normally see. So today what I want to do is there's a town called Chew and Swallow, and they get a storm. But it's not any of the storms that I just talked about. So what I want you to do is I want you to listen to my story. Many of you have probably heard it. Some of you may have seen the movie, but it's a really funny story. And it's called Cloudy with a Chance of Meatballs. I don't think we've ever had a storm like this around our house, so let's see. We were all sitting around the big kitchen table, and it was Saturday morning, pancake morning. Mom was squeezing oranges for juice, Henry and I were betting on how many pancakes we could each eat, and Grandpa was doing the flipping. Okay, I'm gonna make sure you can see the pictures. Seconds later, something flew through the air and headed towards the kitchen ceiling and landed right on Henry. It landed on him. A pancake. After we realized that the flying object was only a pancake, we all laughed, even Grandpa. Breakfast continued quite uneventfully, and all the other pancakes landed in the pan. All of them were eaten, even the one that landed on Henry. That night, touched off by the pancake incident at breakfast, Grandpa told us the best tall-tale bedtime story he had ever told. Across an ocean, over lots of bumpy mountains, across 3 hot deserts and 1 smaller ocean, there lay the tiny town of Chew and Swallow. In most ways, it was very much like any other tiny town. It had a main street lined with stores, houses with trees and gardens around them, a schoolhouse, about 300 people, and some cats and dogs. But there were no food stores in the town of Chew and Swallow. They didn't need any. The sky supplied all the food they could possibly want. The only thing that was really different about Chew and Swallow was its weather. It came 3 times a day, at breakfast, lunch, and dinner. Everything that everyone ate came from the sky. Whatever the weather served, that was what they ate. But it never rained. It never snowed snow, and it never blew just wind. It rained things like soup and juice. It snowed mashed potatoes and green peas, and sometimes the wind blew in storms of hamburgers. When the townspeople went outside, they carried their plates, cups, glasses, forks, spoons, knives, and napkins with them. That way they would always be prepared for any kind of weather. If there were leftovers, there usually were, the people took them home and put them in their refrigerators in case they got hungry between meals. The menu varied. By the time they woke up in the morning, breakfast was coming down. After a brief shower of orange juice, low clouds of sunny-side eggs moved in, followed by pieces of toast. butter and jelly sprinkled down for the toast, and most of the time it rained milk afterwards. For lunch one day, hot dogs, already in their rolls, blew in from the northwest about 5 miles an hour. There were mustard clouds nearby. Then the wind shifted to the east and brought in baked beans, and a drizzle of soda finished off the meal. Dinner one night consisted of lamb chops, becoming heavy at times, with occasional ketchup. Periods of peas and baked potatoes were followed by gradual clearing, with a wonderful jello setting in the west. The sanitation department, that means the garbage department, of Chew and Swallow had a rather unusual job. It had to remove the food that fell from the houses. The workers cleaned up after every meal and fed all the dogs and cats. The rest of the food was put into the earth so that the soil would be richer for the people's flower gardens. So the garbage truck, instead of coming around to collect garbage, they come around and collect all the food. Life for the townspeople was delicious until the weather took a turn for the worst. One day there was nothing but gorgonzola cheese all day. The next day there was only broccoli. And the next day there were Brussels sprouts and peanut butter with mayonnaise. Another day there was pea soup fog. No one could see where they were going and they got stuck in the fog. That doesn't sound very good. The food was getting larger and larger, and so were the portions. The people were getting frightened. Violent storms blew up frequently. Awful things were beginning to happen. One Tuesday, there was a hurricane of bread and rolls all day long. It was a terrible day. Everyone had to stay indoors, and the mess took the workers 4 days to clean up. To help out, the people piled up as much bread as they could in their backyards, and the birds pecked a little bit at it, but it just stayed there and got stale. There was a storm of pancakes one morning and a downpour of maple syrup that nearly flooded the town. A huge pancake covered the school. No one could get it off because of its weight, so they had to close the school. Lunch one day brought 15-inch drifts of cream cheese and jelly sandwiches. Everyone ate themselves sick, and the day ended with a stomachache. There was an awful salt and pepper wind accompanied by an even worse tomato tornado. People were sneezing themselves silly and running to avoid the tomatoes. The town was a mess. There were seeds everywhere. The garbage department gave up. The job was too big. Everyone feared for their lives. They couldn't go outside most of the time. Many houses had been badly damaged by giant meatballs. Stores were boarded up, and there was no more school for the children. So a decision was made for everyone to leave Chew and Swallow. It was a matter of survival. Look at the town. I wouldn't mind those donuts, though. The people glued together the giant pieces of stale bread, sandwich style, with peanut butter. They took everything they had to have with them, and they set sail on their rafts for a new land. Look, they're sailing on the bread. After being afloat for a week, they finally reached a small coastal town which welcomed them. The bread held up. The children began school again, and the adults all tried to find places for themselves in the new land. The biggest change that they had to get used to was buying food at the food store. They found it odd that food was kept on the shelves, packaged in boxes and cans and bottles. Meat had to be cooked, and nothing came from the sky except for rain and snow. The clouds above their heads were not made of fried eggs, and no one ever got hit by a hamburger again. And nobody dared to go back to Chew and Swallow, the town, to find out what had happened. They were too afraid. Henry and I were awake until the very end of Grandpa's story, and I remember his kiss goodnight. Now look, they used the bread, the stale bread from their town, Chew and Swallow, to make their houses in their new town. The next morning we woke up to see snow falling outside our window. We ran downstairs for breakfast and ate a little faster than usual so we could go sledding with Grandpa. It's funny, but even as we were sliding down the hill, we thought we saw a giant pat of butter at the top, and we could almost smell mashed potatoes. Look at the picture. Looks like mashed potatoes with butter on top, right? The end. All right. In Chew and Swallow, they had all kinds of crazy storms, right? What did it rain? When it had a thunderstorm, it rained. They had a shower of orange juice, right? They might have had rain. Okay. When it got really, really bad, what happened? What kind of tornado did they have? Do you remember what kind of tornado they had? A tomato tornado, right? They had a tomato tornado. All right, so would you want to live in Chew and Swallow? I don't know if I'd want to live in Chew and Swallow. Okay. All right, so when a big pancake fell on top of the school, what happened? They had to close school. Very good. Very good. Do you remember why they got why they ended up with stomach aches the one day? Why did they all end up with stomach aches? What did they do? They ate too many sandwiches, right? They ate too many sandwiches. Very good. All right. What happened when there was a pepper storm? What happened when there was a pepper storm? People were sneezing, right? Very good. Okay, so what made the people leave the town of Chew and Swallow? The weather, right? Is it weather like we have? No, but they talked about some of the weather we have. Rain and snow and tornadoes and things like that we had just talked about. But do we have any of those? Do we have any food falling from the sky? No, we don't. But what you are going to do is you are going to pretend in the story, actually I'm going to go back and show you this page. In the story, they said that the people could watch the weather report on television in the morning and they could hear a prediction for the next day's food. Well, you're going to be the weather person for Chew and Swallow today. And you have this paper that says blank predicts that it will be cloudy with a chance of. And what you're going to do is you're going to fill in your name up at the top. So for example, mine would say Mrs. Rooney, not yours. Yours is going to say your name. Mrs. Rooney predicts that it will be cloudy with a chance of. And I'm going to choose a food that will be falling from the sky. So you're going to write the food that you want to see falling from the sky, and you're going to draw a picture of what it would look like with that food falling from the sky. I will show you mine tomorrow morning I'm going to show you mine on Flipgrid in a little bit. But you're going to show me, you're going to write your name neatly up here, predicts that it will be cloudy with a chance of, and you're going to tell me what's going to be falling from the sky. So just like the weather person in Chew and Swallow in Cloudy with a Chance of Meatballs, you're going to predict what food is falling from the sky today, okay? All right, I'm looking forward to seeing it on Flipgrid. I'll see you in a little bit, friends.